Well, welcome everybody. I'm glad you came out for the community conversation. So this is, I think, the second time we're having a community conversation / Crawford County Outdoors combined here. So on our Crawford County Outdoors series with Armstrong, we've had some like do-it-yourself kind of things over the years, everything from making a swing with recycled deck boards and making an Adirondack chair, a gun rack. We made a gun rack one time. We made some deck chairs, a table one time. I'm forgetting a few things, but so it seemed like every one of those, it's like, you know, we're gonna talk at some future time about how to make your own lumber, because a number of those projects came from that. And so that was the motivation for today. Typically our Ask the Expert series are kind of health and those kind of things. This one's all about fun. So, okay. Why would you make your own lumber? So there are things like, I'll show you some videos here, and Dr. Ziegler and I work on these things together many times, and so I'm going to call on him to talk a little bit here too. But would it make, you know, commercial sense to make your own lumber with your chainsaw? And I think the obvious answer to that one is probably not. My first project with making my own lumber was my mother and dad's house. They had a nice little cherry tree that was beside their well when their well was drilled 40 years ago, and the well got clogged up and the well service had to come back in and re-drill. And the tree had grown from a little tree to a big fat tree, and it was in the way of the truck. The truck couldn't get in there. My mother was all upset that that tree's got to get cut down, and it's such a nice tree. And I said, well, I'll make something out of it. I'll make you something out of that tree. So I made her a picnic table, and it's, you know, at the family's cottage at Canada, and it's been there for, I guess, I don't know, 15 or 20 years, something like that now. And it's like, boy, that was kind of fun. You know, I wonder if I can make some other stuff like that. So, okay, so the first video that we'll show, this was a friend of John's, lives next to what's known as, I guess it's still known as Walnut Creek Golf Course.
That's correct.
And
yeah.
all the walnut trees were on the friend's property next door, and the power company decided they were going to move the power line and cut down all the walnut trees. So, which I won't go there. That's a whole other story, I guess, for another time. But so a bunch of walnut trees were laying on the ground, and there was a combination of smaller logs like the one in that picture, but we'll show you. And I'm thinking, boy, I bet you we could make some. So years ago, I've made lots of these for myself, not too many for myself, but some for John, some for other family members and friends. And it's like you always want to have your antlers, so I just use 2x4s and make the little rounded thing, cut the antlers off, you know, and make a rounded thing and cover it with, I rooted through my wife's sewing place, and I've since rooted all of her velvet out of there, so I actually had to go to the store and buy some more velvet to make more of these. But it's like, well, just that thing was not that interesting, so I made a plaque. This one came from an oak tree that grew in my front yard, and the pieces that were left over from that were actually kind of small, so I laminated them together. But so anyways, so what I was after with this walnut, with these logs was, you know, thinking for down the road, for more of these projects, could we make something, maybe not just a fancy, you know, carved out plaque, but we can make something real interesting and unusual. So anyways, let me start the first part of the video, and a couple of funny stories with this one. But so anyways, I was just using that saw without the mill thing attached to it. And well, let me start the video, and you'll see something that happened here is a little bit funny. This is in my side yard, and it always looks like that because it's like, oh, I could use that log. I'm going to save that. Mm-hmm. And my wife's like, why don't you get those logs out of there? You know, and I was like, oh, eventually we'll get them out of there.
Yeah. Yeah, this was some of the black walnut that we had, some of the smaller pieces that were left over. That was going to end up firewood if we didn't come up with a project for it. So
about 3 seconds into the cut here, the chain broke on a chainsaw. So I suppose most folks have had that experience. I don't know if you have or not, but at any rate, okay. John happened to be there and brought along his small saw, which is just for trimming branches and trimming, you know. So I mean, if you have a branch, you know, that big around and you're going to trim, a saw like that's perfect for it. If you're going to try and cut through a log, it's just, even with a nice clean, you know, and freshly sharpened chain or whatever, it's just brutal. I mean, it took 5 minutes, John, to make one cut.
Yeah, that was not the saw to use for that, but we had it.
So I sped up the video here just so we wouldn't be working on this forever. And then when you're going that slowly, you're not making a nice clean cut. So that's going to take a lot of time in the planer or sanding or whatever. I'm like, okay, let me see if I can. So I went digging around the garage and found another chain for that saw. Yeah, so this took forever.
Yeah. And it was a vertical cut, and as you'll see probably in the rest of the video, that as we found some other logs with knots and burls in them and things like that, it really added to the grain of the wood when you could access those. So the vertical cut probably was our first try at it, wouldn't you say, Duane?
And I could still use those more straight ones again, run them through the planer a couple times, and make just a kind of regular plaque like this for a project like this, or for some other smaller thing, even picture frames and that kind of stuff. That'll work. But going with the small saw and having to rock back and forth and over and over and over again, that just didn't work. So again, that small saw worked perfectly. You just need. So if you're going to do this, probably that one's too small. You probably need to get a medium-sized saw at least and go from there. So after this one, again, we took about 20 minutes maybe to make that first one. And I thought, all right, I'm going to go dig around the garage, and I did find another chain. Mm-hmm. All right, so video number 2 here. All right, now as John mentioned, so you can see there's a little knurl or broken off branch or something on that one. And he and I looked it over, and it's like, I bet that's going to make for an interesting grain inside the wood. So let's cut that at an angle. So one thing you need to be careful about, so yeah, that was kind of interesting, I guess, that one. Is when you're now going to cut the log line on its side, it's not going to want to sit still for you, and you don't necessarily want to nail it to something. You don't want to hit the nail with your chain, but still, you get some pretty cool pieces out of there. So, am I making the two sides absolutely 100% perfectly parallel? No, but there's a way to deal with that after. Actually, several ways to deal with that after, and depending on what it is that you wanted to use that for, maybe that doesn't matter anyways. So. It's interesting how that walnut wood, real dark, rich, reddish color in the center, but then right under the bark, it's got a real light color, which is, kind of, I was surprised about that. It's pretty interesting, though. So you can see that the medium size, so that saw is called the Farm Boss from Steel, and it's really a medium size. So bigger motor, and I don't have a long bar on that saw, but it certainly works real well. And if it didn't reach all the way through, you kind of turn around and reach at it from the other end. And then so sometimes you get some little places in there that you have to go and patch up after. But there's, again, lots of ways to do that. So I think that piece, actually that one might have come along tonight. I think that's going to make a nice, interesting maybe way to mount some antlers or to mount something someday on the wall. That'll be interesting. So anyways, here's from, my daughter moved to Michigan a couple of years ago, and it's like, that piece kind of shaped itself like the state of Michigan. So maybe, maybe we'll make her something out of that one. Okay, so if you want just a straight old-fashioned plaque like that, cut them straight. If you want to do something interesting, so that's my first try for one of those. And I think I might make more like that as time goes by. Okay, video number 3 here. So yeah, whenever my daughter Kaylee moved to Michigan, boyfriend got his first deer last year, and it's like, wouldn't that be cool to make him a plaque that's shaped like the state of Michigan? So I think this is the one that's going to look like the. So again, we have a kind of a branch growing off. We had kind of a Y there, so we were on purpose cutting through the branch, thinking that we'd get this mark in the center of the plaque. And then you're never sure what else you're going to get, but kind of like Christmas, kind of like opening a present. You're not sure what's inside there until you give it a try.
So your new chain made all the difference in this thing. It was,
so two things about the chain. One, a brand new chain is going to work okay either way. I stopped at, what's it called? After I broke that chain, I stopped at Cutter's, what's it called? Cutter's Choice. So it's up by Mercier's College. You know where the place is that makes the windows? Not Window World. Seaway Windows. Up off of 38th Street, and then you turn where the ice rink is, and then you turn again. At the end of that, it's like a little mini industrial park. The very last thing before you run to the what's it called, the Parkway or the Bayfront Parkway, there's a fence there, and Cutter's Choice. And so I ordered this thing from them years ago, and oh, it came from Erie. So I went looking for it one day and found it, and there it is. So anyways, I stopped there to get another chain, and the guy's like, "Let me see the chain." So I took it along, so I'd make sure I got the right teeth and everything. And he says, "Oh, you just broke a tooth. I'll fix it for you. That's our chain we sold to you." So he did. He fixed it for me. Put another tooth in that place that was broken. But so they have these things for sale. That's where I got the first one, and they have different types of them. The ones they had displayed, I don't know if you can see, but it's more like this one in the picture, and it mounts onto the bar of the chainsaw in two places, and it has a cover. Well, you'll see in the second video when we were doing some bigger project here, that covers up the tip of the chain. So there's a good and a bad to that. The good is, you're safety-wise, you're not going to be exposed to that bar, the end of the chain. The end of the chainsaw is the part that when that bumps into something, it wants to kick the saw blade up. And ideally, you want your bar to be long enough that it's going to be sticking out of the log on both sides, and you'll see that as we're going along here in a minute. But if you have a bar like this one that's too short, the bar may not even fit all the way through. So there's no way to cover up that end, and so it makes it a little bit more complicated. John got a saw that you'll be very impressed seeing in the video here. That's 36-inch bar, 32-inch bar, and we actually had that log even larger than that in the thicker parts of the log. So I'm not sure if this one with the safety tip on the end would have worked on that one, because it would have been, the safety tip would have been in a way. It wouldn't let us fit all the way through. It would have fit like a 28-inch slog or something like that, but that in the really thickest part of that, it wouldn't have worked.
34 inches in the thickest. So, yeah.
So anyways, a new chain, that's going to give you a quicker cut, which will give you less ripples and less problems. A, and B, you may want to ask for a ripping chain, which when you typically look at the teeth of the chain, they're angled like, I think it's a 25-degree angle as every tooth is going. If you get a ripping chain, they're straight across. They're like at a 0-degree angle, and so that cuts a whole lot more. The chain that you get when you buy the saw, it's a safety chain, and it's like there's a little tooth that sticks up in the back so it doesn't cut that much, and when you're going to sharpen it, you have to file that tooth down and everything. So I always ask for the chain that doesn't have that tooth, because it cuts better, but they're typically, there's like an angled stair-step thing. When they get the ripping chain, they're straight across, and it really, so instead of getting dust, you get like little slivers, but it really cuts, and you need to be extra careful when you have your ripping chain, and you have to sharpen it differently.
It'll kick twice as fast.
It will kick a lot harder and a lot faster, and you have to be very, very careful with it. So a nice sharp chain or a ripping chain. A ripping chain, if you're going to do this all the time or going to do this a lot or whatever, you probably want to get and use a ripping chain.
If you have a steel Pitts Rental, it'll sharpen them for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
A way to sharpen them really well.
Yeah.
So you can use your used chains with back cuts.
And then we also used a skip chain on the other one with it didn't have all the cutting teeth on it, so it was a faster chain to use for the bigger logs with it.
So I noticed when I was looking at this that they're having a special that you can buy the bar and the chains as a package, and that you buy 2 chains and they give you a free one. But they had, like for my saw, I could get a 30-inch bar for that. This motor's probably too small for that big of a bar and chain. But this is a 16-inch bar. I could probably get a 24 and probably good with that. But at this point, I run down one side, and if I don't fit all the way through, I turn around and run back the other side, and that's actually worked. That's actually worked out a number of times. So, okay. So this is called an Alaska sawmill, is what that's called. It bolts onto the saw with those 2 nuts that you can see on the bottom there that grabs onto the bar. The newer version of it, again, it grabs on up here also for a longer bar and covers up the tip, so the tip sticks out and it grabs on. Can you see that one? That's the thing that covers the tip for safety, and it grabs on there and it grabs on there. But this, you bolt on here with these two, and you make sure you're as far away from the chain so that the chain can pass, back and forth easily. And then you undo these two bolts here and slide to get the size that you want of your cut. So, so the way to make the first cut is you need to attach a plank. So let me turn the video on, and you can see John and I doing this on this very large walnut log that was, what would you say, John? Maybe 30 inches?
It was 34 inches, 9 feet.
At the widest point, 9 feet long.
Yeah.
And so you need a guide. So this will ride along your guide to make you that first cut real smooth. But you want to make sure to attach that with something that you have a known depth to. So we used 3-inch screws to attach and made sure that our depth was set for more than 3 inches because you don't want to run into the screw. So another thing about that, someone mentioned about a bandsaw. I just grabbed a hardware catalog here that came in the mail the other day. So for $2,000 you can buy a bandsaw. There's a number of sawmills around that still have the big old blade that's bigger as these tables with the big teeth and so on. And those blades cost like $1,000, and something hits one of the teeth and knocks a tooth off, and then you've got to get it welded. And it's this is even the bandsaw blades for these, they only cost like $25 or $30 or whatever. A chain for this one's like $12 or $13, or for a one like yours is $30-some bucks.
It's probably in that range for that.
So if you do hit a nail or you hit something and break the chain, in my case the guy just fixed it for free. Or $30 is different than $1,000. For the bandsaw actually is a good way to go. John hauled some logs to a gentleman that runs a bandsaw operation on your trailer. And the difference is that if you look at the width of the chain, it's 3/8 inch, something like that wide. The bandsaw is less than half that. I mean, it's almost about 1/4 of an inch wide. So if you're making a bunch of planks out of your nice wide log, you're going to get another plank or two out of there. And in the case of this walnut log, that was actually something that was valuable. So that's something to think about, anyways. So, okay, let me start the video on this big project here. Okay, first thing first, all about safety. John's wearing the chaps there, which we discovered after the fact. I was pulling on one side of the saw, and he was pushing from the motor side, and we decided that I needed the chaps. So we switched that around after. But you can see the 32, John. You say 32-inch bar, and a much bigger motor than this one that drives the thing, and boy, it runs like crazy. So, and is steel the only brand to use? No, but I guess we can talk about models before. That just happens to be a favorite brand of mine, anyways. John's too. Setting that chain tightness, you want to. Now that was a brand new chain, and they do tend to stretch a little bit when you use them for the first few times. So tighten it down so when you give a little pull on it, that you can't see the bottom of the tooth all the way out. You want the tooth to just kind of come up a little bit. Do you know what I'm saying? If the tooth, when you pull on it, if the tooth comes all the way up and out of the track, that's too loose. And if it won't move at all, it's too tight. So, and the brand new chain does have a tendency to loosen up a little bit. So when we first got there, that log was still 17 feet long or something like that, which was too much. So we picked a spot to shorten it so that we could actually manage it. We made it 9 feet, 8? 9
feet, a little over 9 feet for basically the butt log of that. And hope that nobody had, since it was along the road and been there for probably a couple hundred years, we were hoping people hadn't tacked too many things to it with nails as they're doing it. As it turned out, we found one. We found just one, which was buried pretty far in. So barbed wire, yeah, it can go all the way through. Yeah.
I remember talking to the guy at the sawmill, the one that's out near Centerville, and he had the $1,000 big blade, and he's like, oh yeah, we try and chip all the bark off because you never know if something's in there and they don't want to get their blade messed up. So attaching your guide, that's important. So that log was too big to roll around, so we were sort of stuck with the top. We had to work with the top, and there were some dips and dives and so on in that log, and so we had a little bit of back and forth till we got that thing attached right. But you want to make sure when you're attaching it that you don't bow your guide, because your saw is going to follow that. So you see how we had a little bit piece at the end closest to us here. If we'd have attached that with screws and pull it down, that would have made a curve to our log, to our guide there. So, getting the guide on straight, point number 2 there.
You have to countersink the screws so that your guide can slide over them. They can't be up at all above that plank.
So I mentioned before, but then you make sure for that first setting, we want to make sure that we have the depth set on the cut from the Alaska sawmill to the bar that's past that 3 inches that those screws are, because you don't want to hit something metal. Okay. Step number 2. So I mentioned this before, but it's really not overly hard to attach the Alaska sawmill to the saw. And some of these bigger ones have 2 handles, so that on purpose you have somebody. This was actually the small size. This one was made for us. I think it says 24 inches or smaller bar. Ah, 20 inches or smaller. So this is the small log milling attachment. You guys can look at this after if you want to. Or for that matter, we can pass
And
it
probably
around.
most logs that you're going to tackle are 20 inches to 16, somewhere in that range.
So you can see we've got the Alaska sawmill attached there. I guess if you're out in Alaska and you don't have access to a neighboring sawmill, this is the only way to go. So I was helping pull the guide. Oh, John mentioned before. So we did see some nail heads or tack. A lot of the lumber guys aren't real crazy about taking a tree that's in a neighborhood because everybody nailed up. My dog got lost and nailed up a sign there, and yeah, you don't want to even your $30 bandsaw blade or your $30 chainsaw blade, you don't want to break it. So we started looking and we found several. So in the process, well, let's knock off some of the bark. I remember when I was a kid and learning how to use a chainsaw for the first time, my uncle was always telling me, don't ever let that chain touch the ground when you're working. And it's like, what are you talking about? And it's not the cutting the wood that tires at the chain that dulls the chain. It's the dirt. It's the grit, the sand, and stuff. That wears down those teeth. So as we were looking, there was a bunch of stuff kind of jammed down into that bark. So we went down with a hatchet and the back claw of the hammer and knocked off as much of the bark right where that first cut was going to be. And again, John mentioned we found one or two nails or whatever, and we're able to get them out. So yeah, you definitely don't want to hit one if there's a way to avoid that.
And that enables the slide on the saw itself to go across the bark without catching.
There's a little bit of a curl at the front, a little bit of a curl at the back, and so yeah, you want to ride that down. Ride that down the bark, and if you have pieces of bark sticking out every place and things that are going to hang that up, yeah. So we were looking at that too. It was at this point, it's like, maybe I should have those chaps on. John shouldn't have the chaps on. So we did stop and swap here.
It looks more dangerous than it really was at this point.
I was backed way up like this, so I wasn't that close.
It was, yeah.
But from the angle of the camera, it's like, ooh,
we did come to that conclusion.
That looks a little, yeah. So, and also there's a front and a back, and so you have to. Sometimes that first cut, as you're getting the thing lined up, you might have some ripples and so on for that first part of the cut. But once you get rolling, it actually works out very well. So John was pushing from one side, I was pulling from the other side, and you want to, as much as you can, keep it nice and slow and steady, and not rock it back and forth like I was doing with that little one, rocking it back and forth to get the small chain to go through. The steadier you are, the smoother, the less sanding, planing, etc. you're going to have to do at the end. So, John, you had a what type of teeth on the chain?
That was a skip tooth chain. So it had half as many cutting teeth as a standard chain with it. So it was going to, it was very sharp because it was brand new, but it was going to have as much resistance in there. So when we were using that long a bar with it,
each of the planks we ended up cutting. Next step here, they probably weighed 70 pounds, 80 pounds, maybe
over 100.
Maybe 100 pounds
to carry them. Yeah,
so that's gonna fall down on the blade as you go. So those little wedges were very handy, and I had several in my pocket. He had several in his pocket. So every couple of feet we stuck one more in there. And that helped a lot. Now later on I figured out how to do like a time-lapse thing with this video, but this is about the pace, and we weren't forcing it, we were trying to go slow and steady.
I think once you do one of these logs, you start to look along the side of the road for old trees that are down, and you really start to eye up some old pieces of 200-year-old logs that are laying there, and can visualize what's inside of them that you could do.
A couple or 3 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, John and I, so we have the wedges in there holding that top, and so this is, again, like Christmas. Wonder what it's going to look like once you get inside. One thing I thought was kind of interesting is there was a knot there, you see about a third of the way from this end, and it took about the second cut till we got past that knot, but it was letting water into the wood there, which was pretty interesting. I think we'll get a close-up of what some of this walnut looks like, though. But
I think the black walnut cuts about the same as oak. It's not near as bad as hickory to cut. But oak, cherry, and that black walnut would be just about the same.
So that first gap, we had this set for about 3.5 or 4 inches to get through that first set of bark, and then we dropped it down to about 2 inches. So if you are going to plane it down after, you're going to lose some of the thickness of your wood. So take that into account. But generally, I mean, you're getting a 2x4. Well, when you actually cut a 2x4, it's 2x4. By the time it goes through the planer and the sander and everything, it's 1.5 by 3.5. Yeah. So we switched safety-wise here now. So we figured out I was the one that was more at risk. So the first plank cut here now. Again, we're just going for steady, slow and steady. I figured out how to do the time lapse here. Stick some wedges in there, yes.
You know the cost of those, the little attachment?
Say that again?
The cost of the attachment thing, approximately? Or?
This?
Yeah.
This was $125.
Oh, wow.
The one that attaches at both ends is, so for the 24-inch size, $239, for the 30-inch size, $255, and for the 36-inch size, $269.
Okay.
So, but it's got that little tip on the end, so it's like depending on what size bar you're going to use and what size chain you're going to use and so on. So I actually might want to get a bigger bar and chain and then maybe get a bigger one at some point in time. But this is so cool when it's like you look at that wood for the first time, and it's just gorgeous. I mean, I saw something on TV where they had done countertops out of a thing like this.
Yeah.
So once we got these cut and we ended up with, John, 7 or 8 planks?
Yes.
They're going to have to dry for a while because we made one real thick one. Might be a gun stock, well, actually several gun stocks somewhere down the road. But we made most of them like this 2.5-inch thickness, so that could be again, and those things weighed.
There was 5 2-inch ones out of that, and then we had one that was 4 inches thick that we had I took it to a bandsaw, and they cut it into a 4 by 6 inch by 9 feet. That you could have milled into a gun stock. So there's several people in the area that do have bandsaws that you can do that, and they can also de-stress the wood then spin it as they cut it. Once you get the planks.
When you go to use the wood after, are we going to, now these things seem to be drying out pretty quickly. We just cut these about a month ago. I mean, and I almost feel like maybe that could be sanded down and could be used, maybe even later on this year. We're guessing those are going to need to sit for a year or two at the least. There's a kiln operation out in the Conneautville area. So I started the story before and we got off target here, but my brother was building a new house, and the contractor wanted to have a real rustic mantle above the. So I had an oak log that was maybe 12 inches, something like that. So I tried to cut a mantelpiece out of that. It's not wide enough. He needed more, you know. So John had a big cherry log at his property that had come down, and so we cut the mantelpiece out of there, and the contractor needed it in 5 weeks or whatever. So we hauled it out to that kiln out in Conneautville, and it actually, they were able to get it dried, and it's got some cracking at the end, which actually looks kind of cool. So that was kind of our first try at a bigger project like this, and I think is that what convinced you, John, to get that bigger saw with the bigger bar?
It was, because we struggled a bit with that. It was
this little one,
afternoon.
This little one was barely getting halfway through, and then, you know, working the other side. So John had his older saw, which was a longer blade, and got through. And anyways, so this is to me, this is a fun thing. And something, yeah, you can tell
that log that was well over 100 pounds.
Lift with your legs, not your back. Not your back. Yeah.
I think my end weighed more than I did.
No two are the same, huh? They're always different.
No two are the same. No, it's like Christmas. Every time you make a cut in one of those logs, you don't know what you're going to find.
So what we did on the mantle was we actually cut. The log wasn't that big around, and we cut it about, was it, John, about 4 inches thick, I think?
Yeah, that was close.
And then the contractor, he straightened off one side and then left the curve of the log, you know, on the part that leaves that in the room. It's really cool. And a couple of the smaller pieces that he made, I forget which are corbels, is that what it's called? The braces that hold underneath the mantle, you know, and so they have the curve of the log, you know, and so that turned out really. But seeing this wood inside, it's like I was thrilled that we did that, you know. And yeah, 2 or 3 years, whenever that's all dried out, we may start working on some project with that. I like the time lapse thing. You can still see that wet spot from that little knob. You know what would you say, John? That took us maybe 20 minutes to make this cut.
Probably earlier on, towards the middle of the log, it did. The either end was a lot quicker but when we were using the full bar length, it took a little while. You can't push the saw. You're better off to have higher RPMs on the saw than to really push it and have it struggle.
I had to get a close up of this. I like this part where the chain comes busting through right at the end. You got to have that part. You got to have that part. Okay, so I brought along some things that made from this type of work before. I showed you the plaque. This one came from just, you know, without using the mill. After I got that thing, I made several canoe paddles. And you guys pass that around. So this one, of course, the first time I actually tried to use it, I realized I had a knot there, and it kind of made a cracking noise. So it's just a decoration at my house now. It hangs on the wall. But everybody likes those.
And that's ash.
And that was made out of an ash tree that fell down in the back of my house. Now this one, it's all beat up, and it's beat up because I use it all the time. So it's like these aren't just decorations. These are things that, you know. So I made a kayak paddle, and I made the laminated blade so I could put the curve to it. But again, yeah, it gets beat up because this is my favorite one to use all the time. So
once you had the plank for that, you used a power planer, a power hand planer to actually carve those out of the plank.
And a circular saw to make the two sides of the shaft, and the drum sander to shape the handle, and so on.
I think you started with the tracing to begin with.
Yeah, I traced a canoe paddle that came from the store, but who wants one from the store, you know, when you can make your own, right? I mean, yeah. So that little coffee table there, I don't know if we can see that. That was my most recent project. I made the legs of the coffee table from the oak tree that fell down on my front yard, and so the butcher block kind of style top there. One was one that I cut, and one was one that came from the sawmill. And I didn't realize at the time until I started staining it. And the ash, one was oak and one was ash, so I got two different colors. But so I sanded and tried to get them kind of to even out a little bit more. But so again, would that be something that's commercially, you know, would it make sense to make projects and products commercially for that? I don't know, but it's like that was a tree that was in my front yard that fell down. So it's like, well, gotta save that wood and gotta make something out of it. So. Okay, what do you guys think? What, questions or comments or?
Like your saw that you have,
Yeah.
you can probably get them locally, right? Or is that something special?
You can, the saw itself.
Yeah.
No, that's from any local steel dealer. Yes. Yeah.
I'm sure they're pretty pricey, huh?
One that size is, yes. Yeah, it's not one that you're going to cut a little bit of firewood or trim a tree with, with it. For that, you can probably use the 25-inch bar, which you could drop down a couple sizes. To do that, for a saw, you're going to be at least $500 to $1,000 in that range.
And this one's going to be more like $400 or a little bit less. I think this was $390 or $370.
Pardon me?
What is it, a steel, what number steel?
That was a 461.
460.
Yeah, they do make a size bigger than that, but I think they cut redwoods down with it.
Wow.
And that one's 280.
And a 36-inch bar is probably what we don't need. So 32 is about, and you can switch out for a 25. But occasionally you run across a giant butt log like that that's 34 inches across.
So have you done any hickory?
We did do hickory. We had a tree that was hit by lightning, but the lightning went down the outside of it. And we did the same technique on the hickory logs, which we didn't take pictures of. It would have been pretty impressive though, because as you cut hickory, sparks literally come out of the wood. And you go through chains, you only get a few cuts on any one chain, and then you have to rotate chains on it. It's incredibly hard.
My words, the hickory was brutal. This was actually not too bad.
This was, yeah.
The hickory that was brutal. I think we spent like an hour for each cut. This one was maybe 20 minutes a cut. That was like an hour a cut.
It took a tank of gas per cut. Let's put it that way, to make a cut, and that was with a 18-inch bar, I think, 18 or 20-inch bar, and a smaller saw. So having the right piece of equipment to do it is pretty essential. With oak and cherry and this walnut, I think a normal saw is going to do it. The hickory, it's pretty tough stuff, very tough.
So to me, it's like, okay, you have the timber guys, you want a 16-foot log, and okay, if there's a little 6-foot piece. Probably the biggest thing that I ever made was on our Crawford County Outdoor series. We generally have a cooking segment at the end. If we're having a hunting show, we'll have a cooking venison or whatever. At Terry and Lisa Beck's house, I helped them make the bar top that we use for their cooking segment every year from a big oak tree that was in their backyard. That it was weak in one spot, so they were going to take it down. I said, well, tell the guys, save that. I could see up in the tree there was like a 7-foot piece, and it was a big thick base, and it broke into 2 pieces, and the base you could see was kind of bad on the one side, but there was one real straight piece. I save that piece. And I said, well, we can make something for you guys out of that, So I took that saw and I went down one side and turned around, went down the other side, and we had a nice big thick, like 4-inch thick, plank, and took it to the kiln guy and dried it out. And then took it to Larry Slozat and ran it through his planer because it was too big to go through just my little one. And we ended up cutting it into, I think, 4 pieces and glued the pieces back together. But so on our Crawford County Outdoor series, whenever we're doing our cooking segments, we're doing that on a bar top that we made with this saw and with this sawmill thing. So.
When you go to dry the wood, you need to, we're talking about drying that for 1 year to 2 years, and some of it we've had drying for 4 years or so. You have to stick it. And so you're going to get some little pieces of wood about 24 inches long, maybe 1 inch wide, and probably 9 feet is going to require at least 4 of those down the length of the log. And then stacking the planks, you want to paint the ends. It'll keep the checking down. Take some spray paint or hand paint and paint the ends of it to keep this checking from working back up into the piece. And then once you get it all stacked up, you need some cement blocks. You need something with a lot of weight to it to put on top of that stack to keep those planks from wanting to twist as they dry with it. So I usually put 2 or 3 cement blocks over every set of sticks. So I'll have 6 to 8 cement blocks on top of the whole stack to add enough weight to it to keep at least the top planks from wanting to twist and bow as much as you can. With it. If you don't paint the ends, you'll get considerably more checking in it. Some of it you can't help because when you do these cuts, We're not like a sawmill where we're spinning the log and de-stressing the log and doing all the things that somebody who knows what they're doing with a bandsaw or a sawmill will do to a log so it doesn't check as much. We're just cutting the log and come what may with the planks that we get. But at least if you do that, you stand a chance of keeping those planks in pretty good shape.
So
4 years later.
1 year ago, actually probably even this week, or maybe last week, a tree fell on the hospice house. And I worked at the hospital and it was involved in the hospice house project from the very start. And it didn't hit the house, it hit the garage and knocked down a little bit of the fence and so on out back. I called John, it's like, can you help me get that tree cleaned up? And it's like, I wonder if we could make something out of some of that. So I saved some of them. It was a maple tree. So I saved some of the pieces that are like this one, 4 feet or 6 feet long or whatever. None of them were special. Ordinarily would the sawmill save this piece that had a fork in it? No, but I'm like, well, it might be kind of cool, at the end. So I think we've decided I'm going to make them an Adirondack chair out of the tree that fell on the hospice house out there, and put it right beside the fence where it knocked down a piece of the fence. We'll put it right there. So I cut these actually as we were making the small cuts in these plaques. I said, those logs have been sitting there for a year. They're probably dry enough to cut now. And John's right. I forgot to spray the end, so you can see how the little cracks are coming down. But if you don't want to bother with a planer, I just got that for 15 bucks at the hardware store. I just kind of started, and I promised Ann White that I wouldn't make a mess in here tonight, so I won't do that. But it's like probably in an hour. I mean, you could probably smooth this down to the point where you could make it usable. And again, like an Adirondack chair, you only really need to smooth down one side, and then we'll cut the curved pieces for the back and the pieces for the seat and so on, and those cool shaped things for the arms. We'll cut them out of this. But so somewhere down the road, there'll be a tree that fell on the hospice house that'll make a chair for the hospice house backyard there. So. Okay, questions and things you want to know more about? Well, guys, thanks for coming out. We're glad you're here. So most of the time, people don't come out to our community conversation topics, and they just watch it on TV or catch it on YouTube. So I made extra of these plaques. So if anybody would like one, since you're here in person.
Tools too.
Pardon? Yeah, they're in here. They have them at this. It's the arborist store.
You could use those to make.
Oh yeah.
Smoother too.
Yep.
They've done a neat look. Do you have a pattern for Adirondack?
Yeah, the neighbor got one time, and I was tracing whatever, and I said I like this shape a little better. So I've adapted it.
I was just going to tell you, Votech, with the summer camp, the kids make Adirondack chairs every year. So if you needed a pattern.
So in the garage, I have cardboard pieces that are each piece. I have them shaped out. Yeah. So you're all welcome to one of these. We have some more outside in the truck, and you're welcome to one of these if you'd like to have one for a project of your own. So thank you very much for coming to the Community Conversation series. See ya.